There exists a moment in every human life when the veil falls, a moment when you realize that the world you believed in was nothing more than a carefully constructed stage, and you were merely an actor reciting lines written by others. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this truth 5 centuries ago, walking through the corridors of Florentine power, observing how men destroyed themselves not through weakness, but through their stubborn refusal to see reality as it truly is. He watched princes fall and tyrants rise. He witnessed friendships dissolve into betrayal and enemies become the most reliable allies. And in his cold, penetrating gaze, he discovered something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding: the naked mechanics of human nature. What if I told you that everything you believe about influence, about power, about the way humans make decisions, is fundamentally incomplete? What if the keys to understanding why people do what they do, why they follow certain leaders and abandon others, why they make promises they never intend to keep, have been written down for centuries, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to read them without the comfortable filter of moral pretense? Machiavelli did not write for the faint of heart. He wrote for those who wanted to survive, for those who understood that in the theater of human affairs, ignorance is not innocence, but a death sentence delivered in slow motion. Consider your own life for a moment. Think about the last time someone convinced you of something. Think about the decisions you believed were entirely your own. Now ask yourself a question that may disturb you. Were they really yours? Or were you simply responding to invisible strings pulled by someone who understood the architecture of your mind better than you understood it yourself? This is not paranoia. This is awareness. And awareness, as Machiavelli knew, is the first weapon of those who refuse to be victims. The Florentine philosopher spent 14 years serving the Republic, negotiating with kings and popes, studying the subtle art of statecraft in its most brutal and beautiful forms. When he was exiled, when fortune turned against him as it inevitably turns against all men, he did not waste his suffering. Instead, he retreated to his study each night, dressed in the robes of ancient courts, and conversed with the great minds of antiquity. From this solitude emerged a work that would scandalize generations and illuminate others. He wrote not what men wished to hear, but what they needed to know. He understood that comfortable lies are the chains that bind us to perpetual weakness, while uncomfortable truths are the keys that set us free. You are about to embark on a journey through the darker corridors of human psychology. Not dark because they are evil, but dark because they have been deliberately kept from view. The mechanisms of influence that govern boardrooms and bedrooms, political campaigns and personal relationships have never been secret to those who hold power. They are only secret to those over whom power is exercised. Every great leader, every successful negotiator, every person who has ever moved masses or changed minds has understood, whether instinctively or through study, the principles you are about to learn. The question is not whether these techniques exist. The question is whether you will continue to be their target or become their master. Machiavelli observed that men in general judge more by their eyes than by their hands. Everyone sees what you appear to be. You experience what you really are. This single insight contains within it an entire philosophy of human interaction. We do not respond to reality. We respond to perception. We do not make decisions based on truth. We make decisions based on the truth as it has been presented to us. And whoever controls the presentation controls the response. This is neither cynical nor pessimistic. It is simply the operating system of the human mind, as predictable as gravity, and twice as useful to those who understand it. Think about the people in your life who seem to move through the world with an almost supernatural ease. Those who enter negotiations and emerge victorious. Those who speak and find others nodding in agreement before they have even finished their sentences. Those who seem to attract loyalty and command respect without demanding it. Do you believe this is merely luck? Do you imagine they were born with some quality you lack? Machiavelli would tell you that fortune is the arbiter of only half our actions. The other half she leaves to us to control. These individuals have simply learned what others have chosen to ignore. They have studied the game while others pretended no game existed. The techniques you will encounter in this exploration are not theoretical constructs designed to impress academics. They are practical instruments forged in the heat of actual human conflict and cooperation. They have been used by emperors to build civilizations, and by common men to transform their circumstances. They work not because they exploit some flaw in human nature, but because they align with the fundamental patterns of how we think, feel, and decide. Understanding these patterns does not make you a manipulator any more than understanding chemistry makes you a poisoner. Knowledge is neutral. Its application depends entirely on the character of the one who wields it. But let me offer you a warning, not because I doubt your intentions, but because I respect the weight of what you are about to receive. These insights carry responsibility. Once you see the machinery behind human behavior, you cannot unsee it. Once you understand why people do what they do, you will recognize these patterns everywhere, in the news, in your workplace, in your most intimate relationships. Some find this liberating, others find it initially disturbing. Machiavelli himself was accused of teaching evil, when in truth he simply described reality without the polite disguises that make us feel comfortable about our own nature. He held up a mirror, and humanity has been angry at the reflection ever since. What separates the exceptional from the ordinary is not intelligence alone, nor talent, nor even opportunity. It is the willingness to see what is actually there, rather than what we wish were there. Most people spend their lives constructing elaborate fantasies about human motivation. They believe, others think as they think, value what they value, respond as they would respond. This projection is the source of endless disappointment and failure. The master of influence begins with a different premise entirely. He assumes nothing. He observes everything. He builds his understanding not from hopes and assumptions, but from the patient accumulation of evidence gathered through watching how people actually behave when they believe no one is analyzing them. Machiavelli wrote that it is much safer to be feared than loved when one must choose between them. This statement has been misunderstood for centuries by those who read it with outrage rather than analysis. He was not advocating cruelty. He was describing a hierarchy of psychological forces. Love depends on the will of others. Fear depends on your actions. Love can be withdrawn at any moment of convenience. Fear, properly established, creates its own stability. The master of human nature does not choose between being loved and being feared. He understands when each force serves his purpose and applies them accordingly. This is not manipulation. This is literacy in the language of human motivation. You stand now at a threshold. Behind you is a way of moving through the world based on reaction, on hoping others will behave as you wish, on suffering the consequences of patterns you never recognized. Before you is something different, the possibility of understanding the invisible forces that shape every human interaction. The choice to step forward is yours alone, but know this with certainty. The mechanisms you are about to learn have been operating on you your entire life. The only question was whether you would one day learn to recognize them. That day has arrived. The principles themselves are ancient. What is new is your willingness to receive them without the comfortable illusions that have protected you from deeper understanding. The philosopher who guides our journey wrote in an age of swords and conspiracies, of poison and sudden reversals of fortune. Yet his insights apply today with startling precision because they were never truly about politics at all. They were about people, and people, in their essential nature, have changed remarkably little in 500 years. We still respond to the same fears, the same ambitions, the same desires for recognition and security. We still make the same errors of judgment, fall for the same illusions, and remain blind to the same patterns in ourselves that we quickly recognize in others. Machiavelli understood that human nature is the one constant in an ever-changing world, and he built his entire philosophy on that bedrock. What follows in our journey together are 5 specific techniques drawn from the deep well of psychological understanding that Machiavelli pioneered. Each one represents a different lever of human behavior. Each one has been tested across centuries and cultures. Each one works not because people are foolish, but because people are human. And being human means responding to certain stimuli in predictable ways, regardless of our intelligence or education. The brilliant fall for these patterns as readily as the simple. The powerful succumb to them as completely as the powerless. This is not a weakness to be ashamed of. It is a feature of our shared psychology, and understanding it is the first step toward genuine freedom. But before we proceed to the first technique, let me leave you with a question that Machiavelli would have appreciated. How many of your decisions this week were truly yours? How many were shaped by the framing of choices presented to you by others? How many were influenced by emotional states that someone else induced? And how many times did you believe you were acting freely when you were simply responding exactly as someone expected you to respond? If these questions create discomfort, good. Discomfort is the beginning of awakening, and awakening is precisely what separates those who influence from those who are influenced. The first dark secret awaits. A technique so simple yet so powerful that once you understand it, you will see it everywhere. A method of making others do exactly what you want while they believe they are defying you. The reverse trap has been employed by the cunning since before Machiavelli gave it philosophical foundation, and in a moment, you will learn to employ it yourself. Machiavelli observed something peculiar about human nature that most philosophers missed entirely. He noticed that men are driven by contradiction. Tell a man he cannot have something, and suddenly that thing becomes the center of his universe. Forbid an action, and watch as the forbidden becomes irresistible. This is not a flaw in human reasoning. It is the very architecture of desire itself. We want what recedes from us. We dismiss what comes too easily, and buried within this paradox lies one of the most potent weapons in the arsenal of influence. Imagine yourself walking through a corridor. Someone calls out behind you with urgency in their voice. Whatever you do, do not turn around. What happens in that exact moment? Your neck muscles have already begun their rotation before your conscious mind can intervene. The prohibition became the command. The warning became the invitation. This is not about intelligence or willpower. The most disciplined mind on earth experiences this pull, because the instruction not to do something immediately creates a mental image of doing it, and once that image exists, resistance requires constant energy, while compliance requires only release. Consider how this principle operates in the landscape of daily life. A parent tells a child not to touch the freshly painted surface. The child, who had no interest in the paint moments before, now cannot think of anything else. The painting has become magnetic precisely because it was declared forbidden. A relationship ends, and one partner asks for space, begs to be left alone. What happens? The other partner, who may have been contemplating the same separation, suddenly finds themselves obsessed with reconnection. The request for distance created the pull toward closeness. Machiavelli saw these patterns repeated across courts and councils, in matters of state and matters of the heart, and he understood that human psychology follows predictable channels regardless of the stakes involved. The practical application of this insight requires subtlety. You cannot simply tell someone to avoid doing what you want them to do and expect automatic compliance. The technique demands context and credibility. When you present something as beyond someone's capability or outside their reach, you must do so in a way that their ego receives the message as a challenge rather than a statement of fact. The target must believe you genuinely doubt their ability. They must feel that proving you wrong would be satisfying. Only then does the reverse mechanism engage fully. Picture this scenario unfolding in an ordinary office. You need a colleague to take on additional work, but asking directly would likely result in excuse-making and delay. Instead, you mention to them that a difficult project has emerged, something requiring unusual capability and dedication. You express doubt, not loudly, but with just enough hesitation that anyone on the team is quite up to the challenge. Perhaps it should be given to an outside consultant. Watch what happens. The colleague's internal narrative shifts. They begin to see themselves as the exception to your doubt. They start constructing arguments for why they, specifically, should be given this opportunity. By the time they volunteer, they have forgotten that you planted the seed. They believe the motivation arose entirely from within. Machiavelli would recognize this technique as an application of a deeper truth about human psychology. We are not primarily rational creatures who occasionally experience motion. We are emotional creatures who occasionally access reason. Our ego, our sense of identity and worth, operates continuously beneath the surface of conscious thought. When that ego is threatened or challenged, it responds automatically, often overriding what logic would suggest is our best interest. The master of influence learns to speak to this deeper layer. He addresses not what people think, but how they feel about themselves. There exists a danger in this knowledge that must be acknowledged. Once you begin to see the reverse trap in operation, You will notice it being used against you with uncomfortable frequency. Advertising campaigns that tell you their product is not for everyone. Exclusive memberships that make entry difficult precisely to increase desire. Social dynamics where the person who shows the least interest often attracts the most attention. These are not coincidences or natural occurrences. They are deliberate applications of the same principle, designed by people who understood what you are only now learning. The Florentine philosopher wrote extensively about the importance of appearing one way while operating another. This was not hypocrisy in his view, but rather acknowledgement that effectiveness requires understanding the difference between intention and presentation. When you employ the reverse trap, your stated position and your actual goal are opposed. You say you doubt something is possible while hoping the target will prove you wrong. You express reluctance while inviting advance. This contradiction is uncomfortable only if you believe that straightforward communication is always superior to strategic communication. Machiavelli had no such illusion. He knew that results matter more than methods, and that achieving your aims while allowing others to maintain their sense of agency is often the highest form of interpersonal skill. Think about the last disagreement you had with someone close to you. Remember how directly stating your position often hardened their resistance? How the more you pushed, the more they pulled away. Now consider what might have happened if you had employed a different approach entirely. What if, instead of advocating for your position, you had expressed doubt about whether the outcome you wanted was even achievable? What if you had suggested that perhaps their contrary position was the only realistic option? In many cases, this reversal would have triggered their natural resistance to being told what to think, and that resistance would have moved them toward exactly where you wanted them. The ethical dimension of this technique deserves consideration. Machiavelli was not indifferent to morality, despite his reputation. He simply refused to confuse personal morality with political effectiveness. He understood that the same action could be virtuous or villainous, depending entirely on the ends it served. The reverse trap, in the hands of someone pursuing genuine good, becomes a tool for helping others overcome their own resistance to beneficial action. In the hands of someone pursuing harm, it becomes a weapon of manipulation. The technique itself carries no moral weight. That weight is added entirely by the one who employs it and the purposes they pursue. You have likely been on the receiving end of this technique countless times without recognition. The friend who told you that you probably could not handle the truth, ensuring you would demand to hear it. The mentor who expressed doubt about your readiness for greater responsibility, knowing this doubt would fuel your determination to prove yourself. The competitor who dismissed your abilities publicly, understanding that your response would be to demonstrate exactly what you were capable of. Each time you believed your reaction was spontaneous and authentic. Each time you were responding to a carefully constructed psychological trigger. Now that you hold this knowledge, what will you do with it? Will you begin to notice when others attempt to reverse trap you, creating immunity through awareness? Will you employ it selectively when circumstances warrant, using it to guide others toward outcomes that serve everyone's genuine interests? Or will you misuse it, discovering eventually that those who manipulate without wisdom often become trapped in their own deceptions? Machiavelli would tell you that the technique is already in universal use. Your choice is only whether to understand it or to remain its unwitting target. But the reverse trap, powerful as it is, addresses only one dimension of influence. It works on the level of immediate reaction, on the psychology of prohibition and desire. What happens when you need more sustained control, when the goal is not a single action but an ongoing series of decisions that align with your intentions? For this, another technique is required, one that Machiavelli understood intimately from his years of observing how rulers maintain their grip on power: the illusion of choice, the architecture of options, the method by which you allow others complete freedom to decide while ensuring that every possible decision leads exactly where you want. Machiavelli understood something that most people never grasp in an entire lifetime of decision-making. Freedom, as we experience it, is largely theatrical. We move through our days believing we are choosing our paths, selecting from infinite possibilities, exercising sovereign will over our circumstances. But look closer at any decision you have made recently. Who determined the options available to you? Who framed the alternatives? Who set the boundaries of what seemed possible? The person who controls the menu controls the meal, regardless of which dish the diner believes they have freely selected. This insight strikes at the heart of how power actually operates in human society. The crude ruler issues commands and faces resistance. The sophisticated ruler presents choices and receives gratitude. When you tell someone what to do, you trigger their natural desire for autonomy. When you offer them options, each leading to your desired outcome, you satisfy that desire while achieving your aims. They feel empowered. You get results. Everyone walks away believing the interaction was fair and freely conducted. This is not deception in the ordinary sense. It is architecture. You are not lying about the available choices. You are simply designing which choices become available. Think about the major decisions in your life, your education, your career, your relationships. How many of those decisions were made from a genuinely open field of possibilities? Or were you selecting from options that had already been curated by family expectations, social norms, economic constraints, and the limited information available to you at the time? We all believe we are the authors of our stories, but authorship requires controlling not just the words, but the vocabulary itself. Here is where Machiavelli's cold pragmatism becomes truly valuable. He did not waste energy lamenting that human freedom was constrained. He studied how those constraints operated so that he could work within them effectively. He recognized that people do not actually want unlimited freedom. Unlimited freedom creates anxiety, paralysis, the burden of infinite responsibility. What people want is the feeling of freedom within a structure that makes choosing manageable. Give someone 3 options instead of 30, and they will decide faster. Feel more confident in their choice and be more satisfied with the outcome. Give them the illusion of complete freedom, and they will often freeze entirely. Consider how this principle manifests in persuasion. A negotiator who says take it or leave it creates opposition. A negotiator who offers 3 packages, carefully designed so that one is clearly inferior, one is clearly excessive, and one is exactly what they wanted to sell, guides the other party inevitably toward the intended outcome. The inferior option makes the desired choice look reasonable. The excessive option makes it look moderate. The target chooses the middle path, believing they have exercised sophisticated judgment. They have simply walked through a door that was built specifically for them. What does this reveal about the nature of manipulation itself? Perhaps that manipulation is not the introduction of something foreign into human interaction, but rather the deliberate use of processes that occur naturally and constantly. Every conversation involves framing. Every presentation of information involves selection and emphasis. Every time you describe a situation to someone, you are already shaping how they will think about it. The question is not whether you will influence how others make decisions. The question is whether you will do so consciously and with intention, or unconsciously and at random. Machiavelli advised his prince to study the terrain carefully, to know the landscape so thoroughly that movement through it becomes second nature. The terrain of human psychology includes this fundamental truth about choice architecture. When you enter any situation requiring another person's decision, you have options of your own. You can present the matter openly and hope they choose as you wish. You can demand a specific outcome and provoke resistance. Or you can design the decision space itself, populating it only with alternatives that serve your interests while allowing the other person full freedom to select among them. The applications extend far beyond obvious negotiation scenarios. Parents employ this technique instinctively when they ask children whether they want to wear the blue shirt or the red shirt, eliminating the option of no shirt entirely. Teachers use it when they offer students choices about how to complete assignments, while ensuring all paths lead to learning. Leaders use it when they present their teams with strategic options, each of which advances the broader vision they have already determined. In none of these cases is anyone being harmed. In all of them, outcomes are being shaped through the intelligent design of alternatives. But here we must pause and ask a harder question. If you recognize that your own choices have been architected by others throughout your life, how do you respond to that recognition? Does it diminish your sense of agency? Does it make your past decisions feel less genuinely yours? Machiavelli would suggest that such philosophical hand-wringing misses the point entirely. What matters is not whether pure freedom exists, but whether you achieve your aims and live according to your values. The wise person accepts the nature of influence as a feature of human society and learns to operate effectively within it rather than pretending it does not exist. There is also a defensive application of this knowledge. Once you understand how choice architecture works, you become more alert to its use against you. When someone presents you with a limited set of options, you can ask what possibilities have been excluded. When a decision feels somehow constrained, you can step back and examine who constructed the constraint. This awareness does not make you paranoid, it makes you competent. You begin to see the invisible frameworks that shape ordinary interactions, and seeing them gives you the ability to step outside them when necessary. The Florentine philosopher wrote that fortune controls half our actions, but leaves the other half to our own governance. Understanding choice architecture is part of claiming your half. You cannot control how others will ultimately decide, but you can influence what they are deciding between. You cannot determine what they will choose, but you can shape the context within which choosing occurs. This is not total control, and Machiavelli never promised total control. He promised effectiveness within the realistic boundaries of human influence. He offered not omnipotence but competence. Yet even mastery of choice architecture addresses only part of the influence equation. It works on the level of rational decision-making, on how people evaluate alternatives and select among them. But humans are not primarily rational beings. Beneath every calculation lies a foundation of emotion. Fear, desire, guilt, pride. These are the bedrock upon which all our reasoned choices actually rest. And if you want to reach the deepest levels of influence, you must learn to work with these forces directly. You must understand how to invoke them, channel them, and yes, when necessary, create them. The next technique we explore operates at this emotional foundation. It involves the strategic use of a feeling so powerful that it can override logic entirely, collapse resistance instantly, and create openings where none seem to exist. Machiavelli knew this feeling well. He watched it destroy empires and save them. He saw it bind men to causes against their own interests and release them from obligations they desperately wanted to keep. The feeling is guilt, and in the hands of someone who understands its mechanics, it becomes perhaps the most precise instrument of human influence available. There exists within every human being a mechanism of self-judgment so powerful that armies have been raised by it and kingdoms surrendered to its weight. Machiavelli observed this force operating at the highest levels of statecraft and recognized it as one of the primary levers by which humans can be moved. Guilt is not merely an unpleasant emotion. It is an internal court of law, constantly in session, rendering verdicts that shape behavior more reliably than any external authority. When you understand how to engage this court, how to present evidence before it, how to influence its proceedings, you gain access to a form of influence that requires no force, no argument, and often no words at all. The psychology of guilt operates through a simple but profound mechanism. Human beings possess an image of themselves that they need to maintain. This self-image includes their sense of being good, fair, worthy of respect and love. When their actions contradict this image, when they fail to meet their own standards or the expectations of those they value, a painful dissonance emerges. This dissonance demands resolution, and the path of least resistance toward resolution often involves changing behavior to match the violated standard. Guilt, properly induced, creates its own corrective pressure. You do not need to ask for anything. You simply hold up a mirror in which the other person sees the gap between who they believe themselves to be and how they have actually behaved. Consider how dramatically this differs from direct confrontation. When you accuse someone, they become defensive. Their energy goes toward protecting their self-image rather than examining their behavior. When you demand change, you create opposition. But when you simply express without accusation the impact of their actions on your emotional state, something remarkable happens. The court of self-judgment convenes automatically. They begin their own trial, their own examination of evidence, their own verdict. And because the judgment comes from within, it carries far more weight than any external criticism ever could. Machiavelli wrote extensively about how princes should manage their reputations, understanding that perception of character matters more than character itself in practical affairs. But he also understood that this principle applies in reverse. How others perceive their own character influences their behavior more than how they perceive yours. A man who sees himself as honorable will strain against any action that threatens that self-image. A woman who sees herself as generous will feel compelled to act generously, even when doing so serves her poorly. By invoking these self-images skillfully, by framing situations in ways that activate the gap between self-perception and behavior, you can guide others toward the actions you desire without ever issuing a command. The technique requires emotional precision. You must express hurt without appearing manipulative. You must show the impact of their behavior without demanding specific remediation. You must be vulnerable without being weak. This balance is delicate, and those who overplay their hand often trigger not guilt, but resentment. The key is authenticity within strategy. Your hurt must be real, even if strategically expressed. Your disappointment must be genuine, even if you choose carefully when and how to reveal it. Machiavelli despised those who could not distinguish between complete honesty and effective communication. Sometimes the most honest expression is also the most strategic one. Observe how this operates in the everyday drama of relationships. A friend repeatedly cancels plans at the last moment. Direct complaint yields excuses and counter-accusations about your own reliability, but a different approach entirely transforms the dynamic. You might say, with genuine sadness rather than anger, that you understand they must be overwhelmed, and perhaps the friendship simply means more to you than it does to them. This statement makes no demand. It issues no ultimatum, yet it activates every self-judgment mechanism in their psyche. They hear themselves being described as a poor friend. They see the gap between their self-image as someone who values relationships and their actual behavior. The guilt that follows becomes their internal advocate for change. What makes this technique particularly powerful is that it leaves the other person's ego intact. They are not being criticized. They are being given information about impact. They are not being attacked. They are being trusted with emotional truth. This framing allows them to change course without feeling defeated or diminished. They can become the good person they believe themselves to be simply by adjusting their behavior. The door to change stands open, and walking through it feels like redemption rather than surrender. Machiavelli would appreciate the elegance of this construction. You achieve your aim, while the other person feels they have achieved moral victory. There are darker applications of this principle that must be acknowledged. Throughout history, guilt has been weaponized by religious institutions, political movements, and abusive individuals to control populations and partners. The mechanism works regardless of whether the guilt is justified. Entire generations have been bent to the will of those who mastered the art of making others feel perpetually inadequate, perpetually in debt, perpetually obligated. The technique you are learning is not neutral. Its ethical dimension depends entirely on how and why you employ it. Inducing guilt for genuine wrongs serves the cause of repair and accountability. Inducing guilt as a tool of ongoing control creates psychological prisons from which escape becomes increasingly difficult. Machiavelli distinguished between being feared and being hated, warning that hatred undermines power while fear stabilizes it. A similar distinction applies here. Guilt that comes from genuine reflection on one's behavior, that leads to repair and growth, creates bonds of loyalty and respect. Guilt that becomes chronic, that leaves no path to redemption, eventually transforms into resentment and then rebellion. The master of this technique knows when enough guilt has been induced and offers clear paths back to restored standing. They use the mechanism to correct specific behaviors, not to establish permanent psychological dominance. The practical wisdom here involves both deployment and defense. You must learn to recognize when guilt is being strategically induced in you, when someone is holding up a mirror designed not for your benefit but for their control. The telltale sign is lack of specific behavioral feedback. When guilt is legitimate, it attaches to particular actions that can be changed. When guilt is manipulative, it attaches to your very nature, to who you are rather than what you did. The first type of guilt is a teacher. The second type is a jailer. Learning to distinguish between them may be one of the most valuable psychological skills you ever develop. As we move deeper into the architecture of influence, we approach territory that Machiavelli explored with particular intensity. Guilt operates through self-judgment, but there exist even more powerful forces: emotions so overwhelming that they bypass judgment entirely, states in which the rational mind is not merely influenced, but temporarily suspended, moments when people make decisions that define their entire futures, based on what they feel in a single charged instant. This territory is the domain of emotional hijacking, the technique by which someone captures not just your attention or your guilt, but your entire cognitive apparatus. And once you understand how this capture occurs, the nature of human influence reveals itself with startling clarity. Machiavelli watched men make decisions that would destroy them. He saw princes surrender fortresses in moments of panic that no amount of calm calculation would have permitted. He witnessed treaties signed in the heat of anger that cold reason would have forbidden. He observed alliances formed in surges of affection that sober analysis would have prevented. And through all these observations, he came to understand something that changes how we must think about human nature entirely. We are not reasoning beings who sometimes feel emotion. We are emotional beings who occasionally manage to reason, and whoever learns to work with this reality, rather than against it, holds the keys to the kingdom of human influence. The technique is called emotional hijacking, and its name describes precisely what occurs. In certain heightened states, the emotional centers of the brain override the rational faculties so completely that decision-making becomes a function of feeling alone. Fear, rage, desire, grief. These are not mere influences on thought. In their most intense forms, they become thought itself. The world contracts to immediate sensation. Past experience and future consequence fade into irrelevance. Only the burning present remains, and whatever action promises relief from or fulfillment of the current emotional state seems not merely attractive, but inevitable. Consider the political arena, where Machiavelli spent his most formative years. Why do candidates spend so much effort on rallies and speeches when policy documents could convey information more efficiently? Because information is not what they are selling. They are selling feelings. Fear of the outsider, anger at injustice, pride in belonging, hope for transformation. The voter who feels these emotions intensely does not pause to examine voting records or evaluate policy proposals. They vote from the gut, from the heart, from whatever organ we imagine houses our emotional core, and they do so believing they have made a reasoned choice when in fact they have made an emotional one, dressed in the clothing of reason. This is not a flaw to be corrected, but a feature to be understood. The emotional system evolved over millions of years to produce rapid responses to immediate threats and opportunities. It works faster than conscious thought because it has to. When a predator appears, survival depends on action before analysis. Our ancestors who paused to reason about the tiger were eaten by it. Those who fled at the first spike of fear lived to reproduce. We are their descendants, carrying neural architecture designed for a world of physical dangers, now deployed in a world of psychological complexity. And because the system cannot distinguish between a charging animal and a charged situation, it responds to both with the same overwhelming force. The implications for influence are profound and somewhat disturbing. If you can induce an emotional state in another person, you gain temporary control over their decision-making apparatus, not through argument, not through manipulation of choice architecture, through direct access to the processing center that determines how they will act. Salespeople have known this forever. Create urgency, and buyers purchase what they would otherwise refuse. Create fear of missing out, and customers commit before they have time to reconsider. Create connection and warmth, and negotiations that seemed destined for conflict resolve in unexpected cooperation. Machiavelli advised princes to study how love and fear operate in the governance of states. He concluded that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both, not because fear is morally superior, but because it is more reliable. Love depends on the emotional state of the other person, which can shift at any moment. Fear depends on circumstances you can control. But beneath this practical advice lies a deeper insight. Both love and fear are emotional states. Both can be induced. And whoever masters the induction of emotional states holds power that no army or treasury can match. Because armies and treasuries must work through the slow mechanisms of external force, while emotion works instantly from the inside. The ethical terrain here becomes treacherous. To deliberately induce emotion in someone for the purpose of shaping their decisions raises serious questions about consent and autonomy. When does persuasion become manipulation? When does influence become control? Machiavelli did not trouble himself much with these questions, focused as he was on effectiveness rather than ethics. But we are not Machiavelli, and we do not live in the brutal landscape of Renaissance Italian politics. We must wrestle with these questions even as we learn the techniques, because how we answer them determines what kind of people we become in the process of gaining power. There exists a spectrum of application for emotional influence. At one end, entirely legitimate uses. A teacher who shares genuine passion for a subject induces enthusiasm in students. A leader who expresses authentic confidence induces courage in followers. A friend who demonstrates real empathy induces trust that makes deeper connection possible. These emotional transfers are not manipulative because they are honest expressions that invite response rather than manufacture it. At the other end of the spectrum, we find those who deliberately fake emotions to produce calculated effects, who study which expressions trigger which responses and deploy them regardless of what they actually feel. This is the realm of the con artist, the demagogue, the emotional predator. Most of us will operate somewhere between these extremes, and our task is to locate ourselves thoughtfully on the continuum. The knowledge itself is neither good nor evil. Understanding how emotional influence works protects you from those who would use it against you carelessly or maliciously. It also enables you to communicate more effectively, to lead more capably, to connect more genuinely. The same insight that could be used to manipulate can be used to inspire. The same understanding that could exploit can also heal. Machiavelli would tell us that tools have no morality. Only hands do. As we approach the final and most profound technique in our journey, consider what you have learned so far. The reverse trap that makes people want what they were told they cannot have. The architecture of choices that guides decisions while preserving the feeling of freedom. The weight of guilt that turns self-judgment into a tool of influence. The hijacking of emotion that bypasses reason entirely. Each technique addresses a different aspect of human psychology. Each provides a different lever for moving the human heart and mind, but there remains one power that stands above them all. One technique so fundamental that it underlies all others. One principle that Machiavelli himself considered the ultimate mark of the truly powerful. Silence. The technique of not speaking. The power of absence and restraint. In a world that mistakes volume for strength and constant expression for presence, those who understand the weight of silence wield an authority that no amount of noise can match. And in our final exploration, we will discover why saying less often achieves more, why watching creates more power than acting, and why the moment you stop trying to convince is often the moment you finally persuade. Machiavelli spent the final years of his life in a silence not entirely of his choosing. Exiled from power, forbidden from the political stage that had been his life's purpose, he retreated into study and contemplation, and in that enforced quietude, he discovered something that all his years of active diplomacy had not fully revealed. Silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is a presence of its own, a force that speaks without words, that commands without orders, that influences without visible action. The most powerful people he had ever encountered were not those who spoke the most persuasively, but those who knew when not to speak at all. Consider how silence operates in the theater of human interaction. When someone accuses you and you respond, immediately you place yourself on their level, accepting their framing of the conflict. When you remain silent, something remarkable happens. The accuser continues speaking, often beyond what they intended to reveal. They fill the void you have created with their own words, and those words frequently undermine their position. They begin to doubt themselves, even as they continue to assert. Your silence becomes a mirror in which they see their own uncertainty reflected back. You have said nothing, yet you have communicated volumes. This is the paradox that Machiavelli understood but never fully articulated. Power resides not in the capacity to act, but in the demonstrated ability to refrain from acting. Anyone can react, anyone can speak, anyone can fill space with noise and motion, but it takes extraordinary confidence to allow emptiness to remain empty, to let questions hang unanswered, to permit tension to build without release. The person who can sit with discomfort while Others scramble to resolve it holds a psychological advantage that no amount of verbal skill can match. Think of the most intimidating figure you have ever encountered, perhaps a parent whose disappointment was expressed not in words, but in looks. Perhaps a teacher whose raised eyebrow communicated more than any lecture. Perhaps a leader whose simple presence changed the atmosphere of a room before they spoke a single syllable. In each case, the power came not from what was said, but from what was withheld. The space that surrounded them was charged with potential. Anything might emerge from that silence. And precisely because anything might emerge, the imagination of those around them filled the void with whatever they most feared or desired. The practical application of this principle requires tremendous discipline. Our natural instinct is to fill silence, to explain ourselves, to defend our positions, to ensure we are understood. These instincts feel urgent and often carry the conviction of necessity. But Machiavelli would ask us to examine what that urgency actually serves. Usually it serves our own anxiety rather than our strategic aims. We speak to make ourselves comfortable, not to achieve our goals. We explain because we cannot bear to be misunderstood, even when being misunderstood would serve our purposes better than clarity ever could. Here is a technique you can employ beginning today. When you find yourself in any charged situation, whether a negotiation, a conflict, or a moment requiring judgment, pause before responding. Let the pause extend beyond what feels comfortable. Watch what happens in that space. Others will often reveal information they had intended to conceal. They will make concessions you never requested. They will fill your silence with their own projections, and in doing so, they will show you exactly how to proceed. The less you say, the more you learn. The less you reveal, the more others reveal to you. Machiavelli wrote that, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, but few perceive what you are." Silence amplifies this principle. When you speak freely, you give others material with which to understand you, predict you, potentially counter you. When you maintain strategic silence, you become opaque. Others must guess at your intentions, your knowledge, your likely responses. This uncertainty is itself a source of power. It keeps others slightly off balance, unable to fully prepare for what you might do because they cannot fully know what you think. In a world where information is advantage, the person who reveals least while gathering most operates from a position of consistent superiority. But let us be clear about what we have explored together throughout this journey. The techniques you have learned are not games or tricks for the amusement of the clever. They are tools forged by centuries of human observation, refined by the most penetrating minds ever to study the nature of influence and power. The reverse, trap, the architecture of choice, the weight of guilt, the hijacking of emotion, the sovereignty of silence. Each addresses a fundamental aspect of how humans actually operate, not how we wish we operated, or how moral philosophy tells us we should operate. And each can be employed for purposes that build or purposes that destroy. Machiavelli has been misunderstood for 5 centuries because readers confuse description with prescription. He described how power works. He did not always endorse how power works. There's a difference between understanding the mechanics of influence and celebrating every use of influence. The knowledge you now possess can make you more effective in pursuing genuinely good aims. It can help you lead people toward outcomes that benefit everyone. It can protect you from those who would use these same techniques to harm you. Or it can corrupt you, turning every relationship into a manipulation, every interaction into an exercise of control. The choice is yours, alone, and it will reveal your character more truly than any words ever could. What remains now is action. Knowledge that does not translate into behavior is merely entertainment. You have spent this time learning principles that took the greatest observers of human nature lifetimes to articulate. The question before you is simple. What will you do with what you have received? Will you practice these techniques consciously, developing your ability to employ them skillfully and ethically? Will you begin observing their use in the world around you, developing defensive awareness against manipulation? Will you teach what you have learned to those you care about, extending the protection that understanding provides? Machiavelli believed that fortune favors those who act boldly, who take initiative, who refuse to be passive recipients of circumstance. He also believed that action without wisdom is recklessness. that boldness must be guided by understanding. You now have understanding that most people will never acquire, not because it is hidden, but because most people prefer comfortable illusions to uncomfortable truths. You have chosen differently. You have looked at the machinery of human influence without flinching. You have studied methods that can make you powerful and perspectives that can make you wise. The journey does not end here. This video has planted seeds, but seeds require cultivation to become trees. In the days and weeks ahead, practice what you have learned. Observe the techniques in operation around you. Notice when they are being used against you, and develop your ability to respond consciously rather than automatically. Experiment carefully with employing them yourself, always examining your motives and remaining alert to the temptation to use power for its own sake, rather than for genuine good. If these ideas have opened something within you, if you feel yourself standing at the beginning of a different relationship with influence and power, then carry that feeling forward into action. Share your thoughts in the comments below, even anonymously if you prefer. Your observations and questions help build a community of people who seek to understand the world as it actually is. Subscribe to this channel so that you will be present when we continue this exploration in future videos. And most importantly, take the next step. A 7-day challenge awaits you, a practical application of everything you have learned here. 7 days to transform yourself from someone who merely understands these techniques to someone who embodies them naturally. The details are in the video appearing on your screen now. Click through and begin immediately, while the fire of new understanding still burns within you. Machiavelli wrote that there is nothing more difficult than taking the lead in introducing a new order of things. But you have already begun. You have already chosen to see what most people refuse to look at. Now complete what you have started. The question is no longer whether these forces shape human life. They do, and always have, and always will. The question is whether you will remain their unconscious subject or become their conscious master. Choose mastery. Choose understanding. Choose to become the person who shapes circumstances rather than being shaped by them. The prince waits within you. It is time to let that prince emerge.